All right, what a week. Welcome back, guys, for another episode of Productive Lazy Sundays. This week we will continue with the sort of news recap format. Although I would say that I think next week or something we could come back to a deep dive because there is a very interesting topic that we would like to cover. But for this week, we'll remain with three news that we found very interesting and therefore worthy of presenting onto the podcast. And without further ado, jumping into the first one with a big name that I feel like keeps coming up as well, TikTok, right? And TikTok is beginning to test their in-app shopping in the West because the in-app shopping feature already exists and their Chinese version of the application. But this move is also like seen or described as a challenge towards Facebook. So do you want to sort of summarize the news itself and the sort of context around it?
Well, of course. TikTok is working with brands including streetwear label like Hype to actually test out in-app sales in Europe. So, in this case, you do see that, I think more recently in the past 6 months to a year, you see that Facebook is a lot more active in its in-app sales as well. It's starting to have more streaming sales, having more in-app platforms for shopping, and TikTok is coming in as a challenger. In some sense,
Yes.
I would say if you look at it from a Chinese perspective, in the China market, TikTok is probably way more advanced than Facebook. Right, it has achieved a certain level of success that Facebook probably is still working towards. But in the international market, this is a new territory that TikTok is moving towards.
Yeah, and I think on that point, it's also interesting because TikTok is much more advanced in the sort of in-app purchase sort of experience that you will have. But like when Facebook sort of first introduced the whole marketplace or whatever, that was also a move because they sort of learned from WeChat, right? And WeChat was already very much they had integrated JD within WeChat, and there was all this talk about like the in-app purchasing within the app, the notion of super app that we keep mentioning, right? And I think that was a sort of trigger that really made Facebook realize that, if they wanted to grow and if they wanted to become bigger and more important or more intrusive, quote unquote, they're going to move into this direction as well. And now it's interesting because, obviously Facebook is now more established in the West for sure when it comes to this super app sort of mentality. But now TikTok is also applying what they've learned and what they know how to do because the in-app purchasing feature and all of this experience, they've been gathering it for a long time, and the whole industry in China as well is like really mature on that point. So I feel like it's going to be interesting because obviously it'll be interesting to first understand whether or not TikTok is able to reproduce the sort of model and the successful model that they have in China, right? Because that's not a guarantee, and we've talked about it last time as well. There's so many different factors when it comes to these different sort of market that they need to take into account. And they're actually, I think, in the first year of operations where they did it in China, correct me if I'm wrong, but they racked up like a pretty good score of like 26 billion of e-commerce.
Yeah. I think that's in the year of COVID, right? So with a bit push from COVID, it really helped with their in-app sales. And it's starting to become a very significant portion of their revenue going forward. But the challenge here now is that unlike in China, TikTok is very well known in China, maybe less well known in Europe and US.
No, not
I'm not wrong with
anymore.
that. Yeah. Sorry, it's very well known in Europe and US. But less familiar with the idea of in-app shopping, I would say, right? Because in China, it's a very common thing to be shopping in an app. You have all the streaming platforms, but you can, we talked about it before. You can buy all kinds of things on it, but there isn't so much of that. This culture seen in the international market is still growing. But there is a lot more market penetration to happen.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, once again, we keep mentioning this, but it is also like you need this period where you're also educating the public, right? In China, it seems so natural now to be watching a video, to have something, and then, and it's sort of very intuitive as well, because you're watching something and you're like, oh my God, I want, the dress, or I want this shirt that he's wearing, or I want the skateboard that he's riding. And then you have a link there in TikTok China. I think that's super.
No, go. Sorry.
No, and that's super convenient. And I think the question you were about to ask is like, have I ever done it?
No. I was more like gonna say that. Do you think they're in a position to lead this change in behavior?
I don't think TikTok will be. I mean, I definitely think that TikTok is going to be in the position to lead this behavior. I think, but that being said, I think Facebook is already like sort of educated the public. I think the success of Marketplace, the success of like the way Instagram is integrated with a lot of like in-app purchase as well. I think TikTok is also going to be in a good position because the population and the demography that TikTok has as a sort of customer base, right, is a much younger crowd, and therefore maybe more inclined to these new technologies. And especially during this COVID time, especially when there's so many trends. And because we talked about the label hype, right, which is usually more associated to a younger crowd, I think it's going to, TikTok is definitely going to be able to leverage on this crowd that made for example, StockX super successful, for example, right? And StockX is an online marketplace of shoes. And when you think about, especially for all the items that you'd be shopping for, shoes might be one of the things that you might want to try on because you never know if it fits or not. But StockX was super successful because it was on this sort of hype, on this sort of, like the sneaker collection and everything. And therefore TikTok has the same, like maybe not the exact same demography as the customer base, but, very much similar in terms of age range. And I think it's definitely going to, this factor is going to allow them to enable these features and really push for it, maybe even more than Facebook, because Facebook's sort of population and demography is like a bit wider. They have like every age category, whereby TikTok, I feel like, especially in the West, is more like oriented towards young people.
But I don't know whether that's still the truth right now, because I think TikTok got the biggest publicity last year, right? We had Donald Trump advertising for TikTok. Reason why I'm saying advertising is because, with all the, Donald Trump's ban on TikTok, in the end, what really happened? Nothing significant came out of it, to be honest.
Yeah.
Let's put it this way. But it brought out more advertising and more attention to this app that, honestly, if you ask a 20, 30, 40, maybe a 30, someone in the 40s, in US, they probably didn't know what TikTok was until Donald Trump talked about it. I think it has done more publicity than damage.
I mean,
from a plain sight of that, right?
Yeah, especially in the US and
exactly. So given the reach is much wider now, I think what is amazing about TikTok, you need to recognize about it, is that its algorithm is amazing. It knows how to read users' behavior very well. It knows how to understand users very well, right? And I think if there's any company around the world who can take the first step in changing customer behavior, TikTok will be one of them, right? And just an example, it's not the only Chinese company that has changed user behavior, right? If you think about other examples like Pinduoduo or whichever, or these are companies that have changed how people shop, how people buy things on e-commerce, right? Pinduoduo gamified the whole shopping experience, and I think that's an approach that maybe TikTok would actually go towards as well. I don't know, but I think there is this possibility whereby instead of just being a passive player or being a passive platform of saying, okay, we have this additional function that allows you to purchase items on our website, on our app. Instead of doing that, we may push it out in a more active manner to our users, and I think that's the position whereby TikTok can achieve.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, we talked about educating the sort of customer base or whatever, but I feel like that's already been done by Facebook, right? Like Instagram shopping and in-app shopping and everything has been around for quite a while now. So I think TikTok is really just here to have everything handed on a silver platter, and they just need to. I mean, they're already tied up with Walmart, right? They're doing partnership with Walmart. They're also doing a partnership with Shopify. They're clearly pushing for it. We talked about the sort of partnership that they had with the Hype label. I don't think they're going to have any sort of trouble with breaking into it. I think it's just now the really interesting part to watch will be the implementation and how they, will they be very successful? And so far, we've said it earlier, right? And just during this first year, they racked up like 26 billion US dollars just of the e-commerce sort of transaction on their platform.
And that's in China, right? But if you think about the whole market of mobile e-commerce globally or on US versus China, you need to recognize that China is probably like four times bigger than the US in terms of in-app shopping or mobile e-commerce in general. So there is tremendous. You said that Facebook has done the work of educating the general public, but honestly, I don't think they have reached that level. There is still
compared to China, no.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing is that it might not reach the same level as China, and even in China, it's still massively growing, right? So there is still a long way for US to go in terms of mobile e-commerce shopping, right? The population still needs to get used to it. And the position I'm coming from is that TikTok will probably be the app, or maybe be in a good position to change the behavior and turn it into a more active relationship than just being a passive one like how Instagram and Facebook is. Because if you're able to engage users in the whole shopping experience, then that's how you actually change that whole attitude to it, right? And that will probably propel the industry maybe like 3 times or 5 times the next couple of years.
You're very optimistic, but
I'm looking at I'm looking at projections, and I'm telling you they are projecting it to increase by 3 times in the next 5 years.
Projection will be projection until they're actually realized, right? So but I agree. I mean, and at the same time, it's not too far-fetched because it's an early market, right? And especially with COVID and the push of COVID, we've seen that online sales has spiked, and it just the reason why I was really optimistic, and you pointed out the difference with China and everything, but I'm still really optimistic because it just feels like they don't really have a lot of roadblockers, right?
Yeah, no, of course. I think they will be able to gain a very comfortable position, but they will be able. What I'm saying is that they can take on a leading role and drive this much further, right? If US market is like 220 million in terms of their mobile e-commerce sales. Yeah. And China is at 900 million easily or more. So there is tremendous amount of growth that can happen there, and a market that's only 220 million is tiny. This is a tiny small base, right? For a huge market like US and China. I mean, I'll be surprised if this doesn't go to a 10 billion in the next 10 years. Yeah.
And let's not forget inflation.
Yeah, exactly. With inflation at 50% these days, it's going to be 100 billion.
I know, right?
Or I feel like easily.
Inflation has been like the biggest topic for the past month. It's just crazy. But when you print that much money, it feels almost inevitable. But who are we to judge? Jumping off to the second topic. Coming back to the good old EVs, China's BYD, so it's a Chinese, so it's not just an EV manufacturer. They're an automobile sort of manufacturer, and they do a lot of cars, but they are sort of known as well to be a leader in the EV plan and the EV sort of market segment, because they do offer a sort of wide category of like electric vehicles, but also hybrid vehicles. They're about to spin off and list their semiconductor unit. And by this is that BYD is like, they are sort of a very vertically integrated company where they do manufacture the cars, but they also have, like a semiconductor foundry sort of, they have a semiconductor unit. They also have a battery production unit. They're sort of like, they're very present in all of the different segments, so very vertically integrated. And they are going to spin off the semiconductor unit these days, whereby semiconductor is the buzzwords. What is up with that?
I think it's really a time whereby this is such an attractive market for them to do this sort of spin-off to realize the market value in this business. Because just for example, I think earlier this year, Star Semiconductor spun off. It went it went public, and it soared by 870% in the first month. Right. Yeah. So for BYD, this is a very money. Yeah, exactly, right. So this is a massive value creation activity for them. And the advantage, if you think about BYD Semiconductor versus, let's say, Star Semiconductor, is that Star Semiconductor is sort of more focused on just design and outsourcing of manufacturing. But BYD, as you said, is a integrated design and manufacture company that does the whole value chain there. So
what have we learned from the TSMC? The Star is a fabless. If you haven't listened to our presentation of the semiconductor, we've made an episode on TSMC, which sort of recap all the different roles. Sorry, just wanted to
advertise more. but yeah, it becomes a very valuable chain. Do we know how successful this will be? I would say BYD is quite successful in the semiconductor space. Definitely not the most successful. It's second behind Infineon in China. It's about 20% market share, but most of it actually is our semiconductor chips that's being supplied to its own electric vehicles, right?
So we're definitely not talking about 5 nanometers here. We're talking about like much, maybe in the range of like 30 plus, which are like what they're used for cars, which is, more than enough for what their usage of, the semiconductor is. But also, as you said, you mentioned Star Semiconductor, but if you take it back a bit, there's also like just a huge, still like chip shortage in the world, right? We talked about it in the episode on TSMC that there was a chip shortage, but the chip shortage is still going on. And you see so many different, from car manufacturers saying that a lot of the supply chain are going to be delayed, but you've had Nintendo coming out and Sony coming out saying the PS5 and the Nintendo Switch, they can be, the supply would just never meet demand because there's still a chip shortage. And as you said, like all of those conditions just makes it very attractive for BYD to list and be sort of like in a great spot to for cash.
And one more thing I would have to highlight here is that the Chinese government is working very hard to actually build the semiconductor industry in China because they know that it's an industry that cannot rely on external parties. Right? They have faced issues. I think
every country,
not every country.
Like the US as well.
No, but the US as well, yes.
No, but the US as well,
the major countries, yes. Mm-hmm. So right now the US has the technology to do it, right? But China doesn't have the technology yet to be fully independent. To be
so
fully
the US
self-sufficient.
has the technology too.
Right. So that's what they're trying to build. Yeah. That's what China is trying to build. And we have a lead, sort of a market leader, who have sufficient capability to actually lead this. So that is something very attractive.
Yeah. No, for sure. And BYD is also a big name. So like for people who don't know, but BYD is a very big name in China. It sells a lot of cars, and they are really good at what they do. So like it's also not just some random company spinning off their random semiconductor unit. It is one of the giants in the automobile manufacturing business, and they have a good track record. So and it just makes sense.
Yeah, I mean they are working with Huawei to build a Kirin chip. Right. Yeah. And if that's successful, that for automobiles, right? If that's successful, it's gonna be the first Kirin chip that's produced in China that is fully self-reliant and relies on the industrial supply chain completely in China, right? With no external sources.
Yeah.
So that's the attraction there. And just and if anyone is just wondering how attractive BYD is, Warren Buffett actually is one of the largest investors in BYD, right? And I think he invested like 200 million in 2008, and now it's worth 5 billion.
The guy went to Beijing to see the Olympics and and they're like, let me just drop 200 million into this company that I saw on my way in. Fair enough.
Yeah.
No, BYD, and I mean they had a good track record, and I was very sort of bullish on them as well, especially when the whole EV craze was going on. Before people were into Neo and into like all these other brands, because BYD just seems like if Toyota or Volkswagen moved into EV a bit earlier, right? And BYD moved into it. They had, and they're making their own battery. The reason why I'm not as bullish maybe today is because obviously their battery technology might not be as advanced, or they have a clearer edge compared to Tesla, because I don't think anyone does right now. But that being said, as a whole of a company, because they don't just do EVs and they do a lot of other things, I think they have a good track record, and I think this is going to do really well. And
let's hope that's the case. I really hope that's the case. I think the founder is an amazing person when it comes to manufacturing businesses and running, knowing how to run an industrial business. But yeah.
Well, then moving along to news number 3, which is your favorite company. Meituan does not have a direct employment relationship with the 10 million food delivery riders. And so this comes back as well to the biggest news, I would say 2 weeks ago, a week ago. Where Uber...
2 weeks
Uber
ago for Uber, if
yeah.
you meant Uber. Yeah.
Yeah, because Uber was the big one, right? Where the court has made the decision in the UK, at least, that they should label all of their drivers as employees and no longer as quote unquote what we call the gig workers, right?
Yeah, and
so,
I mean it's quite a controversial topic in the sense. For Meituan, the issue is that in the meeting with the Chinese Ministry of Human Resource and Social Welfare, they admitted and said that they have no direct relationship with their 10 million food delivery drivers. And let's put it in perspective,
that's
right?
Crazy.
10 million, okay? Uber has 70,000 drivers in the UK. Meituan has 10 million riders. I mean, when you put
it's like a small country, right? You have a small country.
Yeah, it is bigger than some countries. I have to say, it is bigger than some countries. So 10 million riders, and I would have to say this is really China scale.
Yeah. China scale. Is that the new word?
Yeah. I mean, 10 million food riders. Imagine putting 10 million food riders in the US. That's what 10% of their workforce, or like 20%. I don't know, man. Maybe not 10%, maybe close to 10% of their workforce, but that's how massive it is, right?
Yeah, and I mean, for people who don't know, but I feel like we've talked about this as well in the past, but food delivery has been a big sort of social debate in China, because obviously the riders are working really hard, and there's a lot of the rider's experience, so not the user's experience, right? I'm talking about the rider's experience is also gamified, because so you get penalized if someone gives you a bad review. You have to do it on the very short amount of time to deliver the food, and a lot of those been highlighted, and then it has been a huge social debate, because it's like, well, there's always going to be the people who are like free market theory, right? Like, it's like, well, if it's so bad, why do people still do it? But then there's obviously the people who point out that it's not safe, because people are just gonna rush, and then there have been accident and fatal for some cases, which is very unfortunate, especially when you think it shouldn't be the case. That has made a lot of controversial news, and then when there was a lot of talk about the insurance policy, how do you keep your employees safe? And I think this is also like just the pinnacle of all of this, right? It just comes at the end of all of this and be like, well, we don't have a direct employment relationship with the 10 million people who quote unquote work for us. So
yeah, and the thing is that they make it so explicit that these riders are just subcontractors, And you know,
Yeah.
and for those who's not familiar with how things work in China, for most employees, they do have some sort of insurance benefit or social security with the with the company, right? So
五险一金.
yes, exactly.
I'm gonna, yeah,
五险一
something
金
like
五
that.
险一金 or 五险一金 right? So for them, for these riders, they're considered subcontractors. So what Meituan does is essentially they deduct three renminbi per day from the rider's commission to pay for their own insurance premium. And the insurance premium only covers up to I think if I'm not wrong, medical fees that's up to 60 grand, 50 or 60 grand renminbi. That's
Yeah.
about 10,000, less than 10,000 USD.
No, around 10,000 USD.
Around 10,000 USD, right? So
Yeah.
it's not much, to be honest. If you actually happen, like we said, the riders' experience is gamified. Some riders actually engage in rather dangerous driving or rather dangerous acts just to deliver on time. And if they get into an accident, the insurance will not be sufficient to cover their medical costs, and they'll be out of work.
Yeah.
And they have no social benefits that will take care of them. So I think this is something that is more important. This is very important for the Chinese government, that they will pay attention to. And like what we see in the West, I mean, I do think that they may step in and request Meituan or other players in the gig economy in China to actually take the welfare of the workers into consideration.
Yeah.
And ensure that they are fairly treated, like what we have seen in UK when we talk about Uber and the drivers. That's not to say that's always the best form, but I mean, there are plus and minus to that. Yeah. But if you put it into a US context, whereby there's no public health care, it's up to your insurance to pay for it, then in that case it becomes an issue. With the Uber driver delivering food or whoever, DoorDash delivery person who gets in an accident receive insurance benefits from DoorDash? I don't know the answer, to be honest. Maybe some of the listeners, he actually knows the answer, who is more aware in this space, knows it. But I mean, from the perspective of a gig economy, I think we mentioned about Uber's change to treating its drivers as their own workers and providing a minimal wage for them. This is a big step forward to me, and I think first of all, it's a massive change in the business model for the company. But if you think more from the riders' benefits, having this sort of a more guaranteed wage and more assured income, it's only upside for them, because they still have to work hard to rush for their commissions to ensure that they can deliver as many orders as possible. But it gives them the insurance whereby they can start budgeting for their life, at least know that this is the minimum amount I will earn on a daily basis or a monthly basis. I can budget my expenses, budget my bills. You can use that minimum salary to take on a mortgage. It makes the whole living experience and the gig economy worker experience a lot more enjoyable. I would put it let's put it this way, not enjoyable, but a lot less stressful, right? Because you're not living day to day. You're not completely living day to day, by because you have to pay your house with all cash because you can't take on a mortgage and this and that.
Yeah. And I think that's interesting as well, because when you're describing this, you're also referring to the gig economy, right? And I think the biggest problem that came with all of this is that none of this, well, I mean, obviously the gamification and then, like a lot of those other issues, we won't talk about this, but if you talk about your employment relationship, I think a lot of this is also made in the sense of when Uber was first created or when delivery was first created, maybe a lot of people did this as a gig, right? Some people just did this on the side. But then because it was actually lucrative, for lack of better terms, people did this full time. And so you had this disconnect where you're treating your employees as contractors or like subcontractors, and you you're treating this as a sort of gig economy, but it's not anymore in practice. And I think it was just this disconnect that was sort of played at the advantage of like Uber, Deliveroo, Meituan, and all of those companies that sort of leveraged on this quote unquote gig economy side of an aspect of their relationship with their employees really. And I think it's in China it was being discussed, like social debated for a while, but I think if the government actually comes out and actually puts a decision on this, it's going to put a huge precedent for all the other companies that sort of also leverage on the gig economy, right? So not just deliver Meituan drivers for their meal deliveries, but also for people who might be delivering packages for other e-commerce things and everything. I feel like it's just going to set a big precedent for an economy where e-commerce and online shopping and where just delivery drivers is very present, right?
Yeah, and no, I think in some case, working in the gig economy has become something whereby I guess the millennials do enjoy, because first of all, you do maybe you get a lot more freedom. You can choose when you want to work, how you want to work. You have flexibility in your schedule, so on and so forth, right? So there is definitely upside, and I think a lot more millennials are happy to work in this kind of jobs instead of being stuck in an office job, right? And that's not the most enjoyable work that people love. Mm-hmm. So this is definitely a good step forward for these companies, or for the workers in this case, for the employees. But I would like to just bring another viewpoint into it. As you said, this is definitely a very big precedent that if the Chinese government steps in, or if more government steps into the big gig economy like what UK has done, it might change a lot of things in this, what we have seen in the past 5-10 years since Uber and Meituan and Deliveroo, right? Because it will place a lot more
up until the robots take over, but
right. That's another topic I'll go into, but it could impede innovation, honestly, because you actually essentially threaten the existence of these companies. These companies can survive and have the cost advantage over traditional companies because they are subsidizing the customers by reducing. They are subsidizing customers at the expense, in some way at the expense of the employees, quote unquote, and sometimes at the expense of themselves as well, right?
Yeah, and on that point, it's also like, but then is it good innovation if your business model relies on exploitation?
So then becomes, you need to draw a very fine line between how much responsibility should the company take on? Should the company still go with the old, how traditional companies go about? We'll give you social benefits, we'll give you a fixed minimum wage, we'll give you your pension. Is that what the gig economy is about? And then maybe you breed complacency. It'll just become a different form of traditional jobs, right? Is that the outcome that people want? And then maybe in this case you start having unions out of that, right? So
not in the US, but that's never gonna happen. But
unions in the US.
Yeah, they get unionized in the US as well.
Yeah,
Haven't
exactly.
you heard?
Exactly. So it will happen it might happen in the US.
Well, have you seen how much they're struggling just to get some of the Amazon workers to unionize? And there are probably being like, it's the work condition seems horrible when you hear the testimony and everything. And I say testimony as if, anyway, the sort of interviews and everything. That being said, sorry, that was just a apartheid. Go back. I'll let you finish.
But I'm just saying, I think it's important to actually keep track of how regulations evolve here, and it's not always a good thing whereby I think it's important to take care of the benefits of these workers and ensure that it's well balanced and they're not exploited. But it shouldn't be the case whereby
I agree with you.
These companies should be fully responsible and really have to take care of every well-being. And I'm just drawing the line here, that I'm just trying to put it in a way whereby you need to draw a line of what's the company responsibility and what's your own responsibility for choosing a job like that.
Yeah, I can see and appreciate you playing devil's advocate here, and maybe to put into context for something that what you were saying for is that in France, for example, you've got so many laws and securing jobs and everything that actually people it makes it very hard for people to hire, and therefore it's hard to get a job sometime because people are they would make you jump through a lot of internships, and they really need to make sure that they want you before they hire you because it's so hard to fire you afterward. So there was always this, even back before the gig economy was a big debate, it was always this debate between, where do we stand in terms of like employment stability compared to, because employment stability is good, but at the same time, it makes companies less competitive. And when you're in a globalized sort of environment, if other countries have they have more flexibility in the way they can reshuffle and restructure. And I think it's a fine line, as you said, because at the same time, yeah, you don't want to make it so hard and you don't want to make it so cumbersome on the companies that they ultimately die out and your country doesn't have any national champions and your company doesn't have any sort of innovation that is happening because of all these laws. But at the same time, I think you might want to think about what is the minimum that you at least want to guarantee, right?
Yep.
And I think, especially in the case of Meituan, you have this form of this form of like nothing is set in stone yet, right? And even like the Uber decision at the end of the day, it didn't kill Uber, right? And I actually talked to an Uber driver about this because I wanted to know like how did that impact them? Were they happy about the decision? And they're like, well, at the end of the day, the money was much less than what everyone expected, and then it's not going to change our lives really. So I think it's good to have regulation that makes sense. But it's true, like we also need to consider like the both sides of it and playing devil's advocate to also think about. And I think it's really hard in today's world because you have so many tech companies that are just exploiting or like really pushing the limits, right? Or like breaking the rules and then fixing things after. Like Uber, when they first got invented and when they sort of like first came into different countries, it was illegal, and there was like sort of break things first and we'll talk about it later when we're super rich and successful, right? I don't think that's, it's really hard because at the same time you're like, well, okay, innovation needs to happen, but at what cost? And that's what I was saying earlier, right? Sometimes it's really hard to make this distinction because it's hard to know which one is going to turn out for the better. And this is why I'm saying good sort of well thought out regulation is so hard as well because you're always being sort of reactive instead of proactive. Which makes it hard.
Yeah.
But let's talk about something a bit maybe
last
less
thing
heavy.
I'll talk about this is that I think technology has come to a point whereby if you actually push for this too much, then as I said right from start, business would rethink their business model, right? And that being said, I think a couple of weeks ago we talked about Meituan starting its own self-driving delivery vehicle in Beijing, and there are a lot more other players who's doing that. So
we posted an awesome video on Instagram as well for people who want to check our Instagram account. Yeah.
Yep,
sorry.
exactly. so if this agenda is being pushed too much, then I think it's inevitable that businesses will have to rethink and think about what they can do to replace their workforce. So like I said, it has to be a balance, right? Whereby it makes sense for us to operate, but keep it, provide an additional solution that will maybe help alleviate the stress from current workforce.
Yeah, but I think on that point as well, I think, automated vehicles to replace workforce is just, it's almost inevitable, right?
Not all of them can jump across buildings and climb up the stairs.
So what he's referring right now is the video that we watched about this Meituan driver who was delivering food, and the apartment that he had to go into was on the first floor. And you see the guy like literally like
jumping from the car park all the way up.
Yeah, doing parkour and then like jumping onto the balcony and everything. So yeah, I mean, I don't know. Boston Dynamics got some great robots that might be able to do this. So you never know.
Dexterity is probably one of the most difficult things for robots to achieve.
Well, for low cost robots especially, yeah, we're just not there yet. But yeah, I think that sort of sums up the third news. I think it's a big debate. It's a very big debate, and I think we've seen in recent years that there are a lot of movements when it comes to regulation against tech companies, against monopolies, against workers' rights. Amazon has had a lot of issues as well. I think it's just one of those things that is going to slowly unfold. But unfortunately or fortunately, technology progresses really rapidly, and as I said earlier, regulation is always reactive. Well, sometimes it can be proactive, to be fair, but for a lot of cases, because you don't know what's coming, it can only be reactive, and therefore it's always really hard to, by the time you finish debating on one topic, then you've already had another issue, which makes sort of these things a bit hard to deal with. But yeah, that being said, we'll end here because it's already been a long episode. Thanks everyone for listening again. You can find us, and I will promote these two accounts to the death, on Twitter and Instagram at Productive Lazy Sundays. Thanks again for listening, and we'll catch you next week.